Hey, welcome back PetaPixel viewers, it is Chris Niccolls here. We've got a fun video for you today because look at this, I'm holding a Pentax K1 and I'm testing out the two new 50mm they've released. They're FA Classic and FA HD 50mm 1.4s. But before we get started, what is the actual difference between these two 50mm 1.4s? I mean, we have an FA HD lens, which looks like a fairly modern autofocusing SLR lens from Pentax, and then the Classic goes back to sort of 80s and 90s autofocus lens look. So it's a cool throwback to a retro design. However, it's important to note that although both lenses share very similar optical formulas, the Classic version is tweaked in its lens design to give very interesting flares. Both lenses are still coated, but of course the Classic doesn't have Pentax's more modern high definition, high contrast coatings. And there is a price difference as well. If you want the Classic, although both lenses are affordable, you will pay a premium for it. Now, both of these 50mm are based off of more old school lens designs. You may not even remember a time when a 50mm 1.4 was this compact. I mean, both of them are really easy to carry around, really small, 49mm filter threads on them, and they both have aperture rings. The Classic does have this thinner manual focus. The more modern HD has a little bit of a thicker manual focusing ring, but they're still both using classic screw type autofocusing systems, and you get that classic sound to the autofocus motor. I think you guys can hear that. And why have modern lenses got so much larger? Because you actually tend to get better optical performance, especially at wider apertures. I mean, Pentax do make their own DFA Star professional 50mm 1.4. It is quite a bit larger, physically heavier, and about 3 times the price roughly of these lenses. So how do these older optical formulas stand up as far as sharpness goes? Well, let's take a look at our test charts here. So first off, we're looking at the HD 50mm 1.4 in the center, shooting f1.4. You can see that the details there, it's a little bit soft, a little bit of a loss of contrast. When we stop down to f2.8, you'll notice that it improves quite a bit. I also focus specifically in the corners. You can see here at f1.4, still a little bit blurry. That does absolutely improve as well when you stop down the lens to f2.8. Now, when we look at the Classic series of the lens, honestly, although we've got two separate lenses, there's going to be some sample variation. Looking at the center at 1.4, it's basically the same story. A little bit lower contrast that improves when you then stop down to f2.8, and I found the corner sharpness, as well as you can see here, to be quite similar at f1.4, and then when we stop down to f2.8 as well. So although we have two separate lenses here, I would say that optical sharpness is pretty similar between the two, similar enough that I would say it's basically the same. What you may have also noticed here on these older lens designs is when you're shooting f1.4, you get quite heavy vignetting in the corners. That also improves as you stop down, and overall, although these lenses can deliver interesting results shooting wide open for best optical sharpness, performance, and reduction of things like chromatic aberration, you absolutely want to step down a few stops if you can. Another thing that I found interesting looking at the test charts, I expected there to be quite a bit of a difference in color rendering between the two, but they actually look very similar. The whites are very similar, the color palette's very similar. So the primary difference that I've seen between these two lenses comes down to character, but really more when it comes to things like ghosting and flare and how it handles shooting towards bright light sources. In more moderate light like we have right now, I'm not seeing much difference between the two as far as character goes. I mean, the photos are nice, but they look very similar. It has been Halloween, so I got out there, shot some spooky houses where I have an opportunity to shoot a lot of different colors of light and things like that. And again, I really didn't notice major differences. However, when you do have a stark, bright light source, like the sun, for example, strong highlights like that, and you shoot wide open, what you'll notice with the Classic is you get this really cool rainbow flare effect, and it really is quite interesting. Now, you can accentuate that by focusing on something very close to the subject, but regardless, you get these interesting ghosts that can be a lot of fun to play with. And I didn't find it hokey. I found the actual character to be quite pleasing. And if you don't want that, well, then you go to the 50mm HD version of the lens, and then shooting there wide open, ghosting is very well controlled. I think it's also worth mentioning that when I got both of these lenses, I absolutely expected the Classic version to first off have major issues with just loss of contrast shooting wide open at f1.4 in general. I expected to have really bad flare, if I'm shooting towards light sources shooting wide open. And actually the truth of the matter is it doesn't. It actually has very similar results. It doesn't have the HD coatings, but keep in mind the Classic lens is still coated. It still has anti-flare coatings in the lens. It's really the tweaks that they made to the lens design that give that beautiful rainbow flare. there. And so I would absolutely happily shoot the classic for lots of regular photography and not feel like I'm really missing out image quality wise. So a couple things I want to point out. First off, when you are trying to get these flare examples shooting wide open at 1.4 towards bright sunlight on sunny days, you're absolutely going to want to use an ND filter. Even with the K12's maximum 8,000th of a second mechanical shutter speed, I absolutely want something to just cut the light. Maybe 3 stops has been very helpful today. The other thing I'm going to say is on an SLR, I don't know how many times I've gone into the viewfinder to try to see my playback. That doesn't work. So anyways, I'm getting used to that. It's been fun. I also want to have a look at the bokeh of these lenses and the specular highlight rendition. So first thing I'm going to say is I actually found them to be basically identical. So I'll just talk about them together as one. So shooting wide open at 1.4, the bokeh actually has not too much cat's eye effect, but a very strong soap bubble effect is happening, but also a little bit of chromatic aberration in those highlights. When you stop down the lens, that is reduced somewhat. So I feel like if I want to get more natural, smooth looking bokeh, stopping down is a good idea. And actually the specular highlights still stay nice and round when you stop down. What surprised me on both these lenses is actually how smooth the transition from out of focus to in focus looks. I expected out of focus areas to be quite frenetic and quite, noisy and distracting, but really they look quite smooth. So I don't know how they did it, but this has interesting bokeh and a lot of character. So Pentax has become a company that gives us a unique way of shooting, using an SLR again in a world that's swamped by mirrorless cameras. And I really like this idea of giving us throwbacks to these more classic lens designs, and the look that's inherent there. There's a lot of character here. I really didn't find it to be gimmicky at all, which I like. I absolutely, as a takeaway, expected the classic to be this weird effect lens, and I would only use it for 1 or 2 situations. But actually, in my personal opinion, I would probably get the classic instead of the HD version. I just really liked how versatile it was. I found its optical performance to be quite similar. And then when I do have those situations where I can have fun playing with flare, that's the lens that will do it. And I absolutely hope that we see Pentax come up with other lens designs from the past that they can also bring back and kind of reboot this fun creative process for people. The only thing I will say though is keep in mind that shooting wide open at f1.4, it's fun, but it's not optically that sharp or that great. I mean, if you are really looking for wide open performance, absolutely take a look at the DFA Star 50mm 1.4. That's the one that you want there. Thanks for joining us here on looking at these 2 classic lenses. Definitely leave your comments below. Let us know what you think. And check out the podcast. It's on the same channel, or you can find it on all your favorite podcasting apps. It's just the PetaPixel podcast. We love the comments there as well. Like, subscribe to the channel. We love that too and appreciate it. We'll see you soon with more episodes on PetaPixel.